think the crisis of Europe is a crisis of hope, and we have an opportunity to give hope to people.
Welcome to This Strange Land with Jason Jensen. Join the conversation with other courageous ministry leaders as we explore what it means to serve the church in a rapidly changing and unfamiliar world. Discover insight, wisdom, and inspiration as you live out your ministry calling in this strange land.
Father Elsbett, thank you so much for joining me again. Last time, I just recently listened to the podcast, and there are so many curiosities that I have in what you are up to out there in Vienna. And for those of you joining us for the first time in our conversation, there is another episode where Father Elsbett and I talked about some of his priestly calling in sort of early childhood even, that led him all the way to Vienna, where he has a sort of pseudo-parish. I mean, we can listen for more of the definition of that, where in Vienna, and there are some fruits that he's starting to see the Holy Spirit work there. And last time where we got cut off was talking more through the principles of what you're discovering through your experience and through wisdom and what the Holy Spirit is doing in your context, that I would love to just keep pressing into. And I thought maybe the best way to draw those out and to glean is to set you up with a mental exercise, with a thought exercise. And I want you to imagine that you have been forced to move. You have to go to a new parish or a new context in North America, a new diocese. And the bishop who moved you there has just high degrees of trust in you and has given you a lot of freedom to be able to continue to innovate in a context. And you've got a budget, let's say it's a moderate budget with, not enough to do, the insane, but enough to get you going. But you don't have a team. You're there for the first time, and you get to take all your wisdom, experience, and knowledge and bring it into a new context. My first question would be, where would you start as you land on the ground?
Did you say a parish?
I'd actually reframe it, knowing that you're not in a parish. You are landing in a diocese to bring what you have there in Vienna to a diocese here in North America. Where would you start?
But what is the frame that the bishop is telling me to work within?
Specifically to bring evangelization and fruit to the diocese. Now you could pick. I know you're working a lot with young people or young adults in that context. So I'd be happy to start there if that's the passion. But really, you get your choice in this new context.
Very good question. I would probably spend about a year just traveling the diocese and trying to understand the situation and just talking to a lot of different people, parish priests, maybe the youth ministers of the diocese, just to figure out how the diocese in the United States even work, because I don't know. It's just such a different way of organizing oneself. I think I would try to understand, maybe talk to people in the chancellery office, like how these things, obviously with the bishop, what his vision is for that diocese. I would just try to understand. I think I would probably need a year just to do that. And then I don't know what I would do. I mean, that's because it depends a lot on those conversations, right? So I was just asked about a month ago. I was in Santiago de Chile, and I gave a talk. Well, I gave 12 talks. It was an intensive course to a group of about 50 priests from Chile and Argentina. And as you can imagine, priests are the most difficult audience to speak to, because they all stand there and they're rolling their eyes and they're saying, what's this guy going to tell us? We heard this 1,000 times, and he has no idea about our cultural context and all that. So, and I was kind of thinking, okay, I mean, that's what's going to be the reaction, but they were quite excited actually, and which was very encouraging for me, because it made me realize that I think we've hit a nerve. There's principles that we're learning that are resounding in different cultural contexts. But obviously what I told them at the time was, like, I can't put this into practice in your context. You got to figure that out. I don't know, but these are the principles that we're learning, and this is why. And so I think I would be a fool to walk into a diocese and start doing things without understanding the context, right? And you wouldn't have people, like, you wouldn't even have buy-in. And the second thing, I think after that year, probably depending on the project, if it would be more diocesan wide, or if one says, let's try to focus in on one parish and let's try to do a model of what could be, and see if that turns into a lighthouse, and maybe that'll inspire others. It would depend a little bit. I think I do think, just from my experience now in recent years, I wouldn't go back to just doing youth work. I would try to do something in the line of, I suspect, of some kind of a community where you have different age groups and different different ministries going. So it's not just one ministry, because I think that's precisely one of our learnings here, is that from our context, is that I think in a Christendom world, you could do that a lot more, like with a lot more freedom. You could, do one type of ministry, let's say theology on tap, get people excited. And then, like, I'm thinking here, maybe, if you would have a theology on tap 100 years ago in this country, you could run it, people would get excited, and then they just go to their local parish or to their local whatever. Like, everything else in society would help them to kind of to go take further steps in their discipleship, like from their family to the culture to the feast days that are celebrated in the country to the arts, like everything. And today that's just not the case. So the problem with a standoff one, like alone ministries, is that if they're not thinking in a broader sense of how to get people to take a next step, like where to point people towards, they can be just, in German you have an expression, you would liberally translate it with straw fire, like meaning it would be very short-lived, like you get people excited, but then it's going to die again because there's no follow-up and there's no accompaniment. And I think what a local church community permits is precisely that you can use your different ministries that you have to get people, like, instead of trying to get people into the ministries, and get the people to take next steps. And I think that's the genius and the potential that's in the local church community, however that might look like concretely. Now, I'm not saying the other is not worthwhile, right? Because if they're like, I was thinking, for example, these priests in Santiago, I was talking to some of them are also from my religious congregation, or they're from my religious congregation. They have 10 schools there. They have a university with 8,000 students in that one city. Some of the schools are really big, 3,000-4,000 kids. The problem in a non-Christendom world with these big institutions is they're extremely unflexible. They're not flexible. And in a non-Christian world, it's extremely hard even to find enough teachers that are believing, and everything depends in these institutions on the teachers, right, or on the professors in the universities. And it's like, I think, I don't know if you know, I think his name is Alan Hirsch, The Forgotten Ways. It's a book. He's a Protestant, but he talks about movement dynamics, for example, in China today. Big institutions, just like, for example, in China, underground situation, a movement dynamic of churches works a lot bigger than big institutions, because the big institutions, well, you can't even have them, but they're just so they're not flexible, and we're having to adapt so quickly our strategies and the ways that we do things. Like, even just in the 10 years that we've existed, we've had to, like, change some of our ministries. We had to change things just because society has changed. And just these 10 years, right? So, sorry, I'm thinking out loud with you. But I think the first thing I would do definitely is just, like, try to have an attitude of, I mean, not a feigned attitude of humility, but really that's the truth. I have no idea about the local context. So Again, I would be a fool if I wouldn't try to learn from the people that are on the ground everything I possibly could in that year, and then try to discern.
Yeah, and that's what I thought you would say. So my other way to lead you into this question was, a little bit more of a thought exercise in saying all that you currently have burned down and no one had a memory of it. You didn't have a relational network and you had to start from scratch, but you had the opportunity to speed run into getting into a situation that you have yourself now. So same context that you're in right now, sort of similar dynamics that you find yourself in Vienna. And so you can draw from some of those things. But I'm really interested in we started talking about this last time a little bit too, but what are these principles that you start to look at the situation, and let's use the one that you're most familiar with and have intimate knowledge of, within Vienna, but you had to start from scratch. How do you start processing through that, having, spent many years there, but let's say this first year knowledge is totally with you? How would you start thinking about it there in your current context, having to do it again?
Again, I think it would depend if I would be starting really from scratch or if I would be, for example, in a parish. If I would, but in a certain sense, maybe it's kind of a similar approach, because I would try to get a group of people around me, maybe 5, 6, 7 people, and cast a vision of what could be, and tell them like why, and trying to like inspire a common vision, basically. Well, one step back, I would probably spend a lot of time praying, first of all, and asking the Lord for a vision, and then for a group of people that would maybe share that vision, that He leads me to those people, and then try to get like a preliminary kind of ideas what to do, and then try to get other people that are involved to see if we can, have a common vision of things, where we could go. I think that would be the first thing that I would try to do. And and then I would probably start, I think the vision would be some kind of like, if the diocese would say, do what you could do something like what you're doing now, and it's a quasi parish, which is rather milieu specific rather than territorial. I would probably do something very similar. I would try to focus on I would call him Lucas, and he would be somewhere between 18 and 35 years old, and I would try to describe his characteristics as a target group, so to speak, as somebody that we're trying to reach, who's maybe not totally anti-Catholic or anti-religion, but he's kind of maybe just has no idea, but is at least spiritually open, which is, I think, in Germany now, for example, I think it's about 20% of the population would call themselves spiritually open. But that could be atheistic spirituality, right? It's not, has nothing to do with Christianity necessarily. But there would be an openness. And then I would probably start with trying to have one. I'm a big fan of the weekend, and everything has to do with the masses. I think I mentioned that to you last time, people are looking increasingly for relevant experiences and not just answers to questions, especially that age group, especially Generation Alpha. If I don't feel it, it's not real. Like, you can come with all your proofs of the existence of God, Thomas Aquinas, but if it has no relevance for my life, if I can't make that experience. So I would try to probably do something similar using Chip Heath and Dan Heath's book, The Power of Moments, and their acronym of EPIC, Elevation, Pride, Insight, and Connection, to try to think of how can we create an experience. I think I mentioned this last time. I can't remember what I mentioned to you, what I didn't, but because I was just actually talking to some people recently about these topics. But the idea was, if you have a teacher, let's say an 8-year-old kid, and tells that 8-year-old kid, you've got an incredible voice, you should start singing, that experience can have a greater impact on that child than maybe a couple of years of school for life. And the question that the Heath brothers put them to themselves is, why do certain experiences have such an impact and others don't? Like, I can tell you exactly where I was on the 8th of December, 1993. I have no idea where I was last Friday. I'd have to think about it. Like, why does that happen? And so they analyze and they come up with these 4 elements, which is elevation, pride, insight, and connection. And so, for example, what we've done here also is when we started, we had only one mass, not four, like we do now. But so we crafted that one mass for university students based on those four things, like elevation, pride, insight, and connection. How can we create something along those lines where we can't touch people's lives? Like God has to touch them, like God has created God to create touch. But we can try to create an atmosphere where that might happen, where they might have a relevant experience, where they're make really an experience. Like I don't know if you know the book Story from Robert McKee. It's all about screenplay, right?
Yeah, screenplays.
And so he analyzed like 500 different movies in that thing, and he asks the questions why. He says there's plot movies and there's anti-plot movies. The Europeans usually do anti-plot, which is breaking all the rules. So they can be really interesting movies, but they have a quite smaller audience than the plot movies, which are kind of Greek tragedies in 3 acts, basically. Most of them, not all of them, but a lot of most Hollywood movies are plot movies, like they have these 3 acts. And so what he says is what the Greeks really understood in antiquity is to wrap an emotion around an idea in order to create an experience. Like the question is, how is it possible that across cultures, some of these movies have such, there's so many people listening to and watching them, and even across cultures, right? So that's just an interesting phenomenon. Like you think, why does that happen? And he'll tell you, well, a good movie will show you what a bad movie tries to tell you. And it's because it's telling the truth about something. There's some aspect of human life. Maybe there's something real happening there, where you realize it's touching on certain fibers of the human person. And so that idea to say, well, how can we wrap emotions around ideas to create an experience? So it's not just an emotion. It's not emotionalism. It's not just ethics. It's not just cold facts, but it's trying to create human experience. Well, and I think that's probably what I would do. I would start with that, and then try to slowly enlarge the group of people.
What does it look like for you to start wrapping an emotion around an idea? Like, I understand that in theory, but in your context, like what types of things are you thinking about?
Well, there's different ways. For one example is just I'll take our Saturday night mass. Okay, so we call it the Be Free Mass, and it starts with just the way that we it's the belonging before believing idea. Like you're trying to create community, so you bring people in. People are being seen. Like there's a psychologist here who says, Father, I think what we're doing is therapeutic for a lot of people, because there's a lot of people young people are coming to us, broken homes. They're coming. There's so many different problems that they have, and just like out there in the world, they're somebody if they perform. That's their self-identity. A lot of times is raveled around like their capacity of performance. The German economy loses between 1 and 4 billion euros a year because of burnout, and that's like depending which study you read. It's a complicated topic why that happened. Like it's not just what I'm saying, but it's also what I'm saying, which is people are looking for their identity in what they perform, what they do. So just the fact that you have a place where people can just be who they are, and just without having, not forcing them to do anything, they can just be who they are. That's already, you're facilitating an experience, but it's also creating an insight, which is I'm loved for my own sake, right? So you're, if you have a group of people that are authentically loving the people that are coming, you're creating this idea. Okay, God loves me. It's not just an idea. It's being facilitated through an experience of being loved through another person, through a Christian. It's the sacramental reality. There's a visible sign, this other person who's loving me in a real way, who is making present the invisible reality of God's love through this other person, right? That's one idea. Or just, for example, the homily. So we do TED Talk length homilies. They're 18 minutes, and we do series of homilies. So we have different topics that we develop over a course of several weeks. And I must say I use a lot more time to prepare the homilies than I used to before we started this thing, because we want to show how relevant the gospel is for daily life. Now, the way that I try to construct a homily, though, is a lot more like storytelling rather than just, they have the classical, the Jesuit 3 points thing. The Pope loves that, which is great. No, it's fine. Like I'm not saying that's also, I've done that many times as well. But I try to preach one idea, and the structure of my homily is me, you, God, you, we. That's the whole thing, and it's so that creates tension. Like it's me, so I try to throw a question to the room, which I really have. Like it can't be just feigned or like inauthentically. It has to be a real thing that I'm wrestling with. And then, have you ever had that experience? Like, what is that relationship between freedom and the fact that we say that God, like everything is a free gift of God, or Christians call that grace. Like, how does that work? How does that even fit together? Like, how does that even work? And maybe that's a bad example because it's almost a bit theoretical. You have to be a bit more deep in religious circles to understand even that question. But there's a question that I have. Like, have you ever felt lonely? For example, sometimes when I'm in the lead of the center, so I can ask other people. But at the end of the day, I know the decision. I have got to make that decision. Like it's on me, and I sometimes feel very alone in that because it's on me. I feel the responsibility, and that it's a very lonely place sometimes to have to make decisions. Have you ever made an experience like that? So it's me, you, and you immediately create a connection to the people, to the audience through that, right? But it's almost like storytelling because even though it's maybe not a story, but you're creating. Okay, I want to see how this ends. Like, how does this keep going? And then it's God because you're trying to put, okay, what is the word of God that we've heard today? What does it say about that tension or that question? How does it illuminate that? And then it's you because you try to bring, okay, what are the practical consequences of what we've just thought about together for your daily life? What could be, what could be a crawl, walk, and run step, for example, for you. Or if you're new to our church, maybe one particular thing could be this, like, or if you do not see it yet a God believer, or you're just exploring faith, maybe this could be a step for you. If you're already, with us here for a long time and you feel like then maybe this is something for you. So it's this double barrel preaching idea also from Andy Stanley. Because you're trying to reach different audiences that are in front of you. And then it's we at the end, it's inspiration. Like imagine a community of people, like if we would all be living this, like how would the city look differently? And so it's you have an idea, yes, but you're trying to wrap it around emotion by creating tension, by creating like questions and say, I've wrestled with this, just because if you're trying to find things that are relevant for life, it's usually an emotional thing, right? You're not talking about tree transplanting in the Antarctic, or I don't know, like some theme that has nothing to do with my daily life, but you're trying to show how the gospel is extremely relevant for your daily life. And then through that relevance, it has an emotional significance. And then you're trying to, through creating tension. So that's another way how we do that.
So these frameworks are coming from, like, I think I've read the same book. It's an Andy Stanley book on how to preach or preaching or something along those lines with this framework. So if people are interested, they can read that one, right?
Right. So I think Divine Renovation has also taken that and like that organization, and they've also come out with a book on preaching that I find it even better than the Andy Stanley. I mean, the Andy Stanley book presents the basic framework for that, but they've taken that to a new level. I find.
And on a higher level, what I'm picking up from you is this idea of being able to make relevant people's daily life with this sacramental experience. Why is that so important to you? What have you learned that has made you say, oh, this is a place where, you said you're spending more time crafting the your homily than you used to. Why is that a good investment of your time at this point? What difference do you think that makes?
Our experience has been increasingly that I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but we were getting in more people through our weekend experience than we were through Alpha. We were like doing a lot of Alpha, but and we love Alpha, and we still, that's another conversation maybe. But we just realized we have 10, 20, sometimes 30% of our people every weekend are new. Like there's an incredible potential to reach people. Just like you would never think it. It's so counterintuitive through the Mass, and we like quality is a sign of our love of God. It honors God and is a sign of our respect for our neighbor. Like if they're gonna do me the honor of listening to me for 18 minutes, I owe it to them that it be something significant, and that they not have a bore out and then like never come back again because they just fell asleep during the homily. Right? So it's because we're realizing we're getting people like we're getting people to come, but it's obviously not the homily, it's the whole thing. It's loving the people, it's the beauty of the music, it's the whole experience. Like we have people coming here afterwards. I've never had an experience like this before in my life, and it's a normal Saturday night. Like we haven't done anything super extraordinary. We've just tried to love the people that come, tried to give a good homily. We've tried to that experience of. Another experience that I'm talking about is like people looking for a relevant experience and not just answer for questions. Now, in the whole of the Mass, yes, the homily is more the idea. The rest of the Mass is more the emotion around the idea, but it's not just an emotion, right? Because it's like there's an essay from Pope Benedict about the devotion to the Sacred Heart, and he talks about how. In the beginning of the 20th century, there was a so-called liturgical movement that came mostly out of Germany at the time, and it was we started printing the missals so people could follow along the Mass. At the time, the Latin Mass, the Tridentine Mass, and you would start the dialogue Mass. There was a whole liturgical movement that started around Maria Laach, which is a Benedictine monastery, and where interesting Konrad Adenauer, who became the president of Germany after the Second World War and was during the Second World War. It was a place of spiritual flourishment, and there was a lot of beauty and all that was happening. And yet the Pope said a bit of like, because everything get to an extreme, that some of the liturgical movement of the time was saying we need an objective spirituality to counteract the subjectivism of the 19th century spiritual forms of devotion to the Sacred Heart, ways of the cross, all these non-liturgical forms of worship or liturgical forms which are just too subjective and too emotional, and the Pope points out how it's not one or the other. We need both, and how it's an incarnational principle of our theology. God becomes man, that the flesh and the blood and the emotions and all of that are the stepping stone through how we get to the spiritual realities. It's first, there's a saying from St. Thomas Aquinas, nisi in intellectu quod non est prius in sensu, which means something like there's nothing in our intellect which is not first in our senses. Like it's through sensorial experience that we get intellectual, or we rise above, but it's mediated through the sensory experience, because we're not angels. We don't have an immediate experience of reality. And so that idea of saying, okay, we need to actually, you would never expect this from a Pope Benedict, who's, you could say, well, it's kind of dry, and he would say we need to recuperate the role of the emotions and spirituality. Now, the liturgical movement had a point. Like there is such a thing as just, real mere subjectivism, just emotional hype, that which can be very manipulative, and that's dangerous, right? But that's like, as so many things in our Catholic faith, it's not one or the other, it's both and it's a tension of which you have to uphold. Yeah, and I just think there's a lot there. Like a great inspiration for me are the Jesuits in the 16th century. Like they built the first Baroque church. The famous one is Il Gesù in Rome, where you even have like, it's Jesus appearing and disappearing. It's almost like how shall I say? It's probably today they would have put an LED wall behind the tabernacle or something. Like it was really revolutionary. And they would take in southern Germany where the Calvinists were throwing out, like destroying the churches and painting them black inside and getting rid of all the artwork. And what did the Jesuits do? They set up they turned the Gothic churches and the Renaissance like into Baroque churches, and they changed just normal music, which was being played on the street and different places, and they turned it into Baroque, our Baroque songs, and they changed the Gothic vestments which the priests are wearing, and they all of a sudden we had Baroque vestments, which is kind of a funny thing because sometimes they come like to North America and they're talking about the old vestments, the pre-Vatican II vestments. Yeah, well, those were the contemporary vestments in Baroque times, and the ones that we wear now, the Gothic ones, are the older ones actually. But it must have been such an incredible experience for the people back then, because all of a sudden you had Baroque architecture, you had Baroque vestments, you had even Baroque chalices, Baroque music. Everything was Baroque, and it must have been such an incredible experience. And it was, this explosion of joy which you see in Baroque. I personally like Gothic better, like by my own personal taste, but it was so there's an idea from the Catholic Conference of Catholic Bishops of the United States talking about the need for the priests not to have their own personal preferences in the foreground when the way they celebrate the Mass and all that. It's about what is going to. I mean, obviously not. We're not talking about techno masses or some weird thing like that, but it's seeing how can we. Like there has to be I'm kind of getting off on a tangent, but one of the things that we really like is there's an idea from Romano Guardini, who's a German theologian, even though he has a very Italian name, that some of the listeners might know or heard of. And this is a beautiful German word, one word, Spannungseinheit, which means something in the way of unity and tension. And it's like the both and idea. Like if I just consider my work, I'm going to lose my family. If I just think about my family, I'm going to lose my work. That's not a problem I want to solve. It's a tension I want to keep up. And so if we want to evangelize today, there are certain tensions we need to, we can't hunker down and that's just the old days, but we need to have a healthy tension also with the world and society. And also, I think that has consequences, like even the way that we celebrate our masses and the way that we do liturgy, and to remain relevant for the people of today. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't. There's a place, for example, for Latin Mass and all of that. That's also great, and we need to be promoting our traditions and all of that. But at the same time, I do think we do also need places where we're in dialogue with the modern world. And keeping up that tension,
and what does that look like in your context? Like, how is this innovative tension playing itself out in the context that you find yourself in? Like, what would we look at, at a Mass that your community was celebrating and go, oh, that's we're integrating some parts of modern culture into that. What does that look like?
It's something that it's an ongoing process to try to discern and see where that is, because it's a bit messy sometimes. And there's also kind of a Pope Francis idea, like, I prefer a church which is kind of beaten up but leaving the port and not being a ship that's staying in the harbor. And that's not what it was built for. So one of the tensions really for us is just the musical piece, right? So it's what does that mean for us? So we have a more of a modern music style, and I'm not I mean, I could envision maybe in the future that we would have different masses with different musical styles, also to preserve the tradition. And like, for example, I don't know, Gregorian chant one, and maybe something like more traditional hymnal type of music. And but to do that well, you just need a lot of resources. And so when we started this, I like polyphony. I love Gregorian chant. But when we started this, okay, we said, well, we're trying to reach unchurched young people, and not for everybody, but like if we have to choose one of those styles right now, we're going to go with a more modern worship style. And so that's what we do. And actually think with the beautiful thing, I think if you can really do it badly, but if it's done well, it's Desert Fathers, like it just a revamping of the Desert Fathers of 1,700 years ago, because I'm not talking about the 90s kind of, I don't really like the 90s music style that you have sometimes in churches, but it's, if you're doing like kind of a Catholic version of Bethel or Hillsong or one of something along those lines, and if it's done well, like you sometimes it's made fun of. You all of a sudden the musician is repeating one phrase over and over and over again. That's exactly what the Desert Fathers are doing. It's you're repeating a phrase of the scripture, for example, in order to be in the presence of God. And if the musicians, if they're they know their trade well enough so that they don't have to be thinking about the notes the whole time, but they can be really praying their music, it can be very impactful. So we try to train our musicians so that they're not, first of all, they're not performing. And second of all, they're not even trying to create a space where people might be touched by God, like a beautiful place. But the only purpose of what they're trying to do is praise God and lead the community into authentic worship of God. Then that can be very impactful, like precisely that. Even though the purpose is not, the purpose is to praise God and to give Him the honor and the glory and the praise. It's precisely that which touches people, because, again, I think people of all ages, but maybe especially in today's age, people are very sensitive to authenticity. Like, what are these people doing? And again, it's a prophetic sign, because they're saying either they're authentic, but they seem to be authentic. Like if they're the witness of people authentically praying to God, and they're saying, like, I've had people come and say they really believe what they're doing. Like, what do you do with that? And that's just that in and of itself is already evangelizing. Just that experience. Like, Vienna's the city of music, so we have incredible. Like in St. Stephen's, it's 10-minute way walk from here. You'd have a 100-piece orchestra doing a mass in St. Stephen's, and it's an incredible experience, a Mozart mass or whatever. But if a lot of those people don't even believe in God, like it's not necessarily really a worship experience. The music in and of itself can also touch people. God can use everything, right? But there's a difference when the people that are actually playing the music, it's a form of prayer. That's really different. And I'm convinced you notice the difference. And so that's that, but that's also a tension, right? Because it's, there's, it's not everybody's cup of tea, right? Obviously, maybe. But I think it's just something that's very, very, that's one way that we try to, one example of a dialogue with. Then it's the architecture. So we're in a place where there's people in Vienna that have never been in St. Stephen's, and it's one of the most incredible Gothic cathedrals that, I remember, I didn't even think about this, but like a priest friend came to visit and he said, Father, I've never seen, like, this got to be the most beautiful Gothic church I've ever seen, which I don't know if he was trying to, maybe he was, because, hey, have you been in France? Like, but it is a very beautiful church, right? And yet our reality is that a lot of these people here, they're like this with religion, and for them, all that is just museums. It has nothing to do with, and it's mostly filled with tourists. So to say yes to to bring people and show the beauty of that. But usually it's also a pathway, like you can't do it overnight. But also we need other more modern expressions at the same time. But it's, again, that's the tension. So you don't want to get rid of the old, but you do need to have some expressions of something more contemporary, and to see what would that look like. And so, for example, in a new building, we're experimenting with LED walls, and like as a form of artwork and a way of creating ambient space. And I don't think anybody else in this country is doing something similar. But my inspiration are the Jesuits, like the Il Gesù. What they did back then was so, I mean, they must have had so much pushback about that, what they were doing. And yet it was a movement of the Spirit, right? But then, is it my movement, or is it really a movement of the Spirit, right? That's always the process of discernment. And that's why I'm saying these things are sometimes a bit messy, or like they're tension.
And how do you handle, you must be having pushback in some of these ideas yourself, or, maybe you just have total freedom and there's no detractors, which is probably not the case. But I can imagine them being helpful, and so that you're still tethered to something. But how do you handle people going, hey, this seems like you're, whatever reason, buying into culture, or you're not consistent with the past? Like, how do you handle these, the objections that kind of come to you from within the tradition?
It's quite funny because, I'm a legionary of Christ, and like we're very often here in the media as the extreme right, radical, old wing, traditional dinosaurs, and like branded like that, and so people like, you pray the rosary and then you do worship music, and like they can't quite put us in a box, It's sometimes it's kind of funny. I think one of the ways that we try to do it here is that, thank God, like I'm not the only guy deciding things. I'm not the tyrant that says it's my way or highway, but we try to discern things in community. And so if the leadership team or the bigger decisions, that we try to get as many people on board for an idea as possible, but not like in an authentic synodal way. Like there's, I was just speaking actually yesterday, the Bishop of St. Pölten, which is a neighboring diocese, he wrote me an email a couple of days ago, and he said, Father, I want to speak about this book that you guys translated. I'm really excited. So I was there, and we were talking about the way that sometimes the German church is doing the synodal path, which is very ideological and very who's got the strongest lobby group and that kind of thing, and bullying everybody out. But that's not the way what happened in Rome, and that's not the way that we understand synodality, right? Which is where it's such a beautiful thing, right? Because it's really a discernment of spirits of St. Ignatius in a group. And so you have one person saying in the group, what do you think? And then you're not allowed to answer, but you just go around the group and everybody says their opinion. And then you share what that did with you. Did I have peace? Did I have resistance? And then you share, I had resistance to that. And I'm like, why? And then you try to figure out, well, why? And then you try to see, where's the spirit moving in the room? And so it's not, and then if you have that kind of consensus in the group and in the community, and that we feel confident to make a decision together, then obviously if there's pushback from outside, we just feel a lot more confident that we're going to push back. We're never going to please everybody. That's okay. It's not about pleasing everybody. It's about trying to make the best decisions, which is, I'm very much against like leadership through committee. I think that, then nobody has a hat on. There has to be personal responsibility, and it's not about, again, the same thing. It's the same reason. It's not about trying to. This is an idea from Patrick Lencioni. You're not trying to have consensus with everything, but you're trying to make the best decisions. But to do that, you've got to listen to everybody, and you have to really listen to everybody. And I think I don't remember once where, for example, myself as the lead pastor here, I've ever gone against what, at the end of the day, the leadership team was saying. Like there's a beauty then of being able to say, hey, we're together in on this, and then we can take criticism outside. Now, obviously, sometimes also the Spirit can be talking to people that are giving you pushback, right? So you have to be willing to listen to what they're saying and try to not just push all criticism aside, but trying to really listen. And I think we try to do that with all our weaknesses and that we have. And do we always get it right? Probably not. But we try. I think we try to be open to the Spirit of God, and so that gives. It would be very different if I would be deciding everything. That'd be horrible. But I don't.
Yeah, they say ideas kind of move in three patterns through history. One, they're labeled as fringe, fringe theory. The second stage is that they're violently opposed. And then the third phase is they're accepted as self-evident. And I think it's natural to think that as you try to innovate in a context and in a world where we need to be doing that, we need to find approaches to sharing the faith with others, that the old way is not working, or the way that used to work for, hundreds of years is not the same anymore. In that transition point, we're going to be faced with these things that there's opposition to. But one of the fascinating things kind of to come back to this is that there's been a growing consensus that, Mass is not the place to evangelize here in many circles here in North America, saying, hey, we need a soft entry point or things like that. And you're sort of flipping that idea on its head. And I've also had some very recent experiences where I noticed somebody new at Mass, and I say, hey, I haven't noticed you here before. Are you new? And there are stories of people like, yeah, I had my first communion, I'm back after 10 years. I don't really know what to do. And, that sparks a conversation. But what do you think about this idea that that Mass is a place for evangelization, and it's not only for the inner group? And the reason I ask is, in the early church, it was sort of, you had to get, the secret invite to be able to come to Mass because of the risk of, persecution and all those kinds of things. Why do you believe that the Mass is such an important piece now, and is sort of your central focus for evangelization in the context that you find yourself?
I'm not sure that I could answer that question for everybody. Like, again, I am just saying what's working in our context. And I have some hunches why I think things are like this, and I can share those. So I am aware of the discussion. For example, we're very good friends with Father James Mallon and Divine Renovation people, and they would say Mass is not the primary area of evangelization. You should use Alpha. Or if you figure out some other evangelization tool that's your prime entrance door, great. But it's not the Mass. So I understand that. I get that, and I respect that argument. And we do also have other entrance points, which is, right now, well, we have the youth Alpha. We're not running the normal Alpha right now out of different reasons. We can go into that, if you want. But there's we're looking for some areas for Alpha alternatives, but we were quite excited about the youth Alpha, so we do that as well. And we have another program called Adventure in Faith, which is even to the like, if you would say this is the unchurched and this is the saint, then, and let's say Alpha is here, Adventure in Faith is even further to the left of that, like from my perspective. It's even for more unchurched people than Alpha. So we have different programs. I would venture to say that really none of those programs are really the first point for most people. For a lot of times, even though there's now exceptions of that, but is personal relationship. I think that's the first entry point for most people. There are some exceptions. We're increasingly noticing that Instagram and social media is also a first step for people. I never thought that would be possible 5 years ago, but it's happening. We're getting more and more people in that door as well. But the personal relationship aspect, like, it's invest in your people and invite them to come, but invest in your friends and your personal relationships and your working colleagues. That's the real point of evangelism, right? The first point of contact is that. And then, but the same thing happens for Alpha, right? You're inviting somebody then to come to an Alpha course, after that. So the first real step is none of these programs, but it's personal invitation. It's maybe it's a social media thing, or somebody's following you for a while and watching what you're doing and seeing if you're authentic on social media. It has some kind of an emotional connection to what you're doing, and then actually ventures to come through your door, listens maybe to some of your preaching, and then actually shows up at the doorstep. But so I would venture to say, like, I'm also thinking with you out loud right now, but I mean, I think I want to share some of the hunches. I think I was talking to Pete Hughes. I think it's Pete. I always mix them up. Tim and Pete Hughes. Tim is he's a great musician from HTP London. He runs a church. An Anglican church run a Gas Street church, I think in Liverpool. And he's written a lot of, anybody likes worship music or that kind of more modern style music, they'll probably have sung some of his songs. And his brother runs also another one. He's within the HTP network in London that have started the Alpha courses, and kind of for young professionals people. And I was talking to him already like 5 years ago, and he was saying that they were getting about the same amount of people through the front door through the weekend experience like through Alpha. And that was just the development that they were seeing already 5 years ago. And the point that I'm trying to make it before is people are looking increasingly for relevant experiences and not just answers to their questions. So does Alpha give an experience? Yes, it does. You know, especially like a lot of times people would say, I remember when it was going really well for us back in the day, after 4 or 5 times, people would come and say like, why are you doing this? You know, they didn't maybe listen so much to the content, but just the fact people were investing so much in them out of charity, out of pure love, and trying to create a beautiful meal and a whole surrounding, and they're all doing it free of charge. And just, you know, that experience of authentic Christian charity, something that moves people a lot. But just the fact that Alpha has a question mark as their logo, as their corporate identity, shows you where the emphasis is. It's about, you know, trying to also see about like reasons for the faith and going deeper into that. And obviously, that's not quite being fair to Alpha, because it does really try to facilitate eventually an experience of Jesus, which usually is hoped to have happened on the weekend, on the Holy Spirit weekend. Even though, yeah, I mean, that's a whole lot. I'm using Alpha as an example because maybe it could be some other evangelization tool that you're using. It's the one I'm most familiar with because we love it and we've done it so long. But my point is, our experience was, with time, we were getting a lot more people in on the weekend in the masses than we were getting into Alpha. And that's just an experience that we're having. That's just the way it is. And there's another phenomenon that, like 2 or 3 years ago, I was starting to pick it up. And I don't have statistics, but it's more and more and more and more people are confirming this to me across all fronts, across different religious Christian denominations, that you can, after COVID, increasingly, Gen Alpha, you can be a lot more direct in proposing the kerygma than before. Like, and one of the reasons for that, I think, is just because their parents still had hang-ups about the church. These people, they just have no idea. And there's so much. I wrote a book on St. Joseph. This seems kind of like a tangent, but it's not really. And like this 33-day consecration of St. Joseph, I did a German version of that. And like there's a revival of St. Joseph in the Catholic Church. Why? Well, I think one of the reasons is because there's a lack of identity. People are looking for, there's no examples of fatherhood, what that even means. What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a Christian man? There's, be whatever you want. Yeah, but I think young people are increasingly looking for just some firm ground to stand upon, where there's people that actually believe in something and have solid principles, and so that being more like direct in proposing the gospel. One, like I saw an article just yesterday. France, Ash Wednesday, like shock of people just rubbing their eyes. Their churches are filled with young people wanting to have the ashes. Like, why is that happening? And one of the theories here also, it has to do with the Muslims, because there are a lot more, we have a lot of Muslims in Europe coming more and more. And they're, a lot of times, some of them become secular, a lot of them, but there are a lot of them that are still very much religiously practicing their faith. And that's making Europeans ask themselves, like, who am I? Like, what do I believe? And so, I don't know, there's just a lot more openness to come directly, walk into the church. And now this is again counterintuitive. Like, we had a weekend for our community in the fall, and we decided to do 4 witnesses of young people that have come to faith. And of those 4, like, one girl, she was baptized last Easter. She's now 23, actually works full-time now for us, or part-time for us. But she was kind of New Agey. She had a hatred for the Catholic Church, developed her during her teenager years. How did she get to know, like, what was her point of entrance? It had to do with the Eucharist, and ultimately Eucharistic adoration. And of those 4, 3, it was the Eucharistic adoration. And I said, wait, you're not supposed to come to faith through Eucharistic adoration. That's step number 8 or 9 or 10, but not step number 1. Just the other day, there was somebody, we have adoration here every night, and, well, not every night, we wish we had every night, but almost, like, we want to have 24/7, 365. And so one of the days, one of the evenings, somebody didn't show up. So I put our Lord back in the tabernacle, and then somebody showed up and said, hey, can we do adoration? Like, just spontaneously. And so I put Jesus back on again. And it was some guy who had brought somebody else with him. The other person was not a believer. And there they were for an hour in adoration. And we have a guy now who's going to be baptized at Easter. He does an hour of adoration every week. He's not even baptized yet. And so there's a lot of our concepts about how to do evangelizations, which are just kind of blowing our minds, and which we're trying to get our heads around. And what does that all mean? But one of the things that we're just experiencing is that we can be more direct. We can just present things as they are. Because, we're one more product on the smorgasbord of ideas. Like Charles Taylor, Canadian philosopher, this idea of the optionalization, the secular age, his massive book, if you can make it through it. And we're one more option. So people want to know, okay, what do you have to offer? Like, and don't beat around the bush. Just tell me who you are. And so it's, yes, content, but it's also, they want, like, again, because also we live in an age of authenticity, to quote Charles Taylor again. And authenticity has to do with what I feel, which is half insane, but there is some truth to that, because the human person is not just an angel. And if I can't experience it, it's not real, in this modern mindset. Then, and there's some truth to that as well. So there's that's just an experience that we're making. And why we think now, I should a caveat. For us, Mass is not a means of evangelization. But I was trying to point that out with the musician example before. We don't produce music at the Mass so that people will be touched by God. No, we have music at Mass in order to honor God and praise God for His own sake, without any other secondary considerations. But it's precisely that which is touching people. It's the way that I the other priests are trying to celebrate Mass, with worthiness, but people have also told me afterwards, or I've come to hear, when we see you guys elevate the host, it seems that you really believe you really believe that's God. You just notice it, and that just touches people. And then you combine that with trying to give relevant teaching. There's something beautiful that's happening there. And
I've heard a powerful analogy in the same sort of lines as, when a husband and a wife are in love with each other and start dancing together in the living room floor, you'll have these toddlers that will just come and want to get, wrapped up and entangled in their legs. And it's like this love that you have for Jesus, when your, music ministers are truly worshiping, and when the priests are celebrating the sacraments authentically, and we are acknowledging the presence of the one that we love in a world that is starving for that, the very nature of love itself, it seems like they're just getting wrapped up in the love affair that, sort of entangled in the legs of, this love affair that the church has, the bride has with the groom.
That's a very beautiful way of describing it. Yeah, that's and a shorter way of describing it than what I've been trying to describe it. But that's I think that's exact. Actually, that's pretty much spot on. I think that's exactly what's happening, and it's obviously not just the priests, it's not just the musicians, but it's the people there, that the core of the community that is actually believing in God, and that just rubs off. Like it's how they sing, how they participate, how they're at their devotion at the Mass. And then I didn't mention this, but after our Masses, we usually have a time of praise and worship afterwards, like directly afterwards. Sometimes we'll have some adoration there as well, just get people in front of Jesus. He seems to do something. But it can be sometimes, it's not really ever scripted how long it's supposed to be. It's just kind of, play it by ear, but especially with the families, they have to go sometimes quicker and so on with the little kids, and the kids want to run outside. But our young professionals Mass or the student Mass, they're all like, it can be half an hour, 3/4 of an hour afterwards, and there's people that stay around, like even for that, and they don't want to leave. And then we'll do some kind of version of prayer ministry, like I'll be standing in front, hey, anybody, general blessing now, but if somebody wants to be prayed for personally or has some intention, and even somebody who doesn't believe in God likes to be prayed for. It's the same reaction. I was in St. Stephen's Cathedral the other day, and I was just thinking there must have been I'm sure there's 2,000 or 3,000 candles that have been lit, and some atheist and Muslim, I'm sure, is even lighting a candle, because there's something like there's some easy wins that we have, like some, and again, now you're saying, okay, it's superficial. You haven't taken the person from Adam and Eve to become a saint within half an hour. Yeah, okay, but they've taken a step and they've opened their hearts and they have made a good experience of something Catholic, and they've made an experience of something which they can't sometimes even formulate what that was. I'll give you another example. I gave a talk. Like if I've told you this before, like stop me. But I was giving a talk here at the local University of Psychology, and we're very Freudian here, and very Vienna is the city of Freud, and also Viktor Frankl. So it's but psychology is big in this city, and I was asked to give a talk at I can't remember exactly what the topic was, but afterwards there was a congress, and a now atheist, former Muslim from Iraqi student who was an astrophysicist, who I can't remember if he was working together with Dawkins or not, but I mean, he was really an interesting character. And he came up after the talk, and he thought it was kind of interesting. And I thought, what in the past, before I started the center, I would have invited him for a beer. I mean, that wouldn't be disrespectful because he was no longer a practicing Muslim. So that would have been the typical thing I would have done, but it wouldn't have given him an experience of church, what it means, what church is. And so, and I keep telling everybody, hey, invite your friends. So I said, okay, I got to do it as well. So I invited him to come to Mass. And he showed up about a month later. Didn't come right away, but he showed up a month later. And he came late with his girlfriend, who's a mathematics professor or something, and she's also atheist. And that particular day, our church was so crammed. We had put stools in the aisle, and there was just 2 seats left right in front of the altar. So, and they came late. So they walked right up to the front, and they sat right in front of the altar. And I said, oh, they have no idea. They've never been in the Mass before in their life, So, and as typically, we kind of say the typical things at the beginning, like a mass has 3 parts. These are the 3 parts. This is a dynamic, and if you feel free, like this is what we do, these different motions that we do, but please feel free to like whatever your conscience or whatever you feel like comfortable with doing. And so we kind of do lead through the mass, but nevertheless, it's challenging, right? And so after the mass, they stuck around because we have to get into our church. You have to go through this kind of cafe, kind of hip, modern, cool place to be, hang out, cafe. So people get stuck there. So he was stuck there for about half an hour after mass with his girlfriend and just talking to people. And then he was gone. And then about 4 months later or something, he calls me up and he says, Father George, can I come and talk? And I said, sure. And so he came and he said, I'm an astrophysicist. I'm not a neurologist. And maybe there's some kind of quantum physical laws that I'm not aware of. But there was something in that mass. And I want to understand what that is. I'm a scientist. Like, what do you mean? When you Christians say you believe, what do you mean? And it was like... But so my point is, he experienced something. He couldn't explain it necessarily, but he made an experience of something, and that he got him curious. And that's what we're trying to do, right? Is get people curious, take next steps. Sometimes that will go faster, sometimes it'll go slower. But I agree with all those who say Mass is not a means of evangelization. The first priority is liturgy. It's praising God. We're worshiping God, but it's precisely that which I think increasingly in our crazy world is touching people. They're making an experience of beauties. They have so many different elements because you have the teaching. You're wrapping ideas with emotions. But not any emotions, but authentic beauty, like Bishop Barron and the idea of, the transcendentals, the true, the good, and the beautiful, and like, leave me alone with the truth. Leave me alone with your morality or the good. But beauty, that can be a way in. So there's the beauty. There's the beauty of the music. There's the beauty of the liturgy. There's the beauty of the teaching, like, because our teaching is just, because it's true and good, it's just beautiful, right? Like what the church teaches, from the theology, the body, to social teaching, to what Jesus has to say. It's just such a beautiful vision of the human person, and that touches people.
We've got a mutual friend in Chicago, Mary Marr, and we're working on a project, and you've generously given us some consulting into it as well. And what you're describing seems to be this thing that we're trying to name. And worldview shift is sort of the one thing, where you have somebody who's an astrophysicist, and, you mentioned atheist, but he's probably a particular type of atheist in that he's a naturalist, or, in some sort of way that when you say he's curious, what I hear is that there's an internal living system in which he's processing the world. And you guys are inviting people into an experience where the perception of reality is questioned. That internal living system that is helping them perceive how the world works and how it, how things move and live and have their being. And it sounds like you're awakening a curiosity for sort of this moving beyond. You're almost introducing, Charles Taylor, this enchanted version of reality, right? Or the enchanted self, as opposed to this modern self that doesn't have a cosmic reality, is not a possibility.
But let me give you another example, like, just to say that it's obviously not. I think the first contact of evangelization a lot of times is, again, the personal relationship. So another example, a young couple, she's originally South Korean, actually a Canadian background. He's Austrian. He is again another physicist who is really atheist, but really anti-Catholic. Like, God does not exist. God is a problem. Religion is dangerous for humanity. they have a huge fight. He offends her, like in a way that's, very offensive. And she says, this is at their home, just in their apartment. She says, just a second, I have to go to the bathroom. She goes to the bathroom, prays the Our Father, comes back and forgives him. And he's in shock. He doesn't like after what I just did to her, how in the world can she forgive me? Like after just, going out and for 1 minute, whatever it was, 2 minutes, pray the Our Father, comes back and is capable in that moment. And that just blew his mind. Like it blew his mind. Like he said, his worldview of things. Like, how is that even possible? And that's what kind of to lean into what you were just saying, that there's but so that can happen in the Mass. But so we're far from saying, we'll take whatever we get. But we're just saying our main focus is just trying to praise God on the weekend well, and trying to love people that come here, and then invite them to the next step of discipleship, and then accompany the people on that pathway. But that presupposes also, in a sense, that we have to get our people that are, that are believing in that our core, that they understand, we're actually just today I was reflecting a little bit upon, we're building a new place, and it's 8 times the size of what we have now, and it costs a lot of money. And so I was just writing kind of an introduction to, actually in this case our community, to inviting them to help out, with the last what we still need, right? And even though anyway, and so I was trying to think of start with why, Simon Sinek. What is our why? Just remind everybody, why are we doing this? Why are we moving into a new building? Because if it's just about us, we could stay here. But we want to get as many people as possible that opportunity to experience God, right? And I was just reflecting. I was thinking, what was kind of the starting point was 10 years ago. I had read the book Rebuild from Father Michael White and Tom Corcoran in Baltimore, and that really convicted me, because I all of a sudden, one of the things he said, the problem of the church today is a problem of culture, and that what he meant with that was that we have a vision of church which almost comes from economics, in the sense of, the church is a service provider, the lady that come are the consumers, and we're the priests are here to make sure that we're offering spiritual products, that we have decent homilies, that our marriage prep is good, that the young people are having good experiences, that we're preaching good retreats, that we're giving these spiritual products to a passive laity kind of thing. And I realized there was a moment where it's so hard to get out of that mindset, because it's so embedded in our people, and look at churches all around, and it continues to be a fight for us. We had a huge paradigm shift, but it's the pull is always towards that, to become inward focused. It's all about us, about the people in the pews, instead of outward focused. This from main in submission, to use the divine innovation analogy, is that's really tough to do, because everything pulls you in the other direction. And so I'm mentioning all of this because it's so important that the people understand that it's not Father George. No, we're going to help Father when we feel like it, to do his thing. But we together have a responsibility to bring the city back to Jesus, and to do everything in our power. Obviously, we're one of the contributors. It's God is going to touch people. I understand all that, but God is asking us, that's a sacramental function again. We're in a certain sense sacraments, because we're visible signs of breaking present the invisibility of God. Jesus doesn't pass out the 5 fish or the 5 loaves and 2 fish himself. He asks Andrew and Peter and everybody else to do it. It's always that dynamic in the gospel, and he's using us where his feet, whereas right. So that they understand, hey, church, the church is not just on Sunday, obviously, and it's not just my personal life. It's not just I'm going to learn more and more about my faith, and I'm going to try to serve the poor. But it's also, we're evangelists. So I don't do mission once in a while, but I am a mission. This is an idea from Pope Francis. Every one of us is a mission from God for the world. And so
I just want to unpack. I feel like you were getting into, very deep waters here, and I just want to kind of unpack a little bit, of what I'm hearing. And I want to jump on that thing you said about spiritual products. Like I sort of have an intuitive sense that in many contexts, the giving that we find in a Catholic context, as we hand the basket around in Sunday, in the conversations I've had, and this is anecdotal for sure, but I think the general mentality is I'll put a $20 bill in there, and that'll be the biggest denomination that you'll see kind of pass you round. Because in some people's minds, the way they're doing that is this idea of, I'm buying the service of my priests, very modest salary. The upkeep of this building is, they're doing a basic calculation. So how much do I need to contribute to kind of keep this thing going? That's sort of the mentality of, people putting dollars in the basket. It is not, and you can see that in the giving amounts. It's, if we see the economic capacity of, the cities that we live here, especially in, say, Vancouver, and forget economic, recessions and all that kind of stuff. This is a trend that's far beyond any current economic climate. The economic reality doesn't match the giving that we see. It very much is I'm a consumer and I'm trying to give that. And what I see you inviting people into as you're kind of talking through this thing is, hey, the opportunity, if we can shift our mindset to be, I am the mission, and I'm no longer giving into the maintenance of this, but I'm actually giving because I believe the mission and the vision that is being cast, which is something that is a huge struggle for, priests in North America to kind of have that flip. And some of them where that happens, you just see flourishing. And then at the same time, I hear you saying the fields seem to be ripening, and the harvest seems to be here. We see white, heads on the wheat, and it's time to go for harvest because we have people who aren't encumbered by sort of the cultural narrative that their parents had, where religion was this thing to be avoided. They don't even know. They've never heard what the gospel is or anything along those lines. And the other thing you said was that Ash Wednesday was packed. That's the second time I've heard that this week, of a phenomenon where Ash Wednesday was absolutely packed. I was talking to a young adult center in Kansas this week, and their Ash Wednesday service was triple the amount of people that come through all their services on a Sunday. And they don't have an explanation for why. But I think this idea is that, and I've been thinking about that. I'm not sure what's happening, Do you have any ideas?
I was on a plane in the United States, actually. I was fundraising in the US for a project or trying to, anyway. And it was Ash Wednesday. And so I had gotten some priest friend of mine to give me the ashes in the morning. And I had this huge, it was always embarrassing. And I was in the airport, right? And so people, coming up and saying, Father, do you have any ashes? It was quite interesting. And here we do a thing we call it ashes to go. So we go to the mall and just offer ashes to go. And it's every year, but this year also. I wasn't here. They just told me about it. How it's really interesting how there is an openness. We didn't have the masses of numbers like that we had in France. I think the church in France is a lot more healthy than it is here. They also have, there's a variety of reasons for that. But you see, there's still the secularism of Europe present in France, but you see signs of revival that you just don't see here. But yes, so we also noticed the interest that there is in Ash Wednesday, and it's such an opportunity, evangelistic opportunity. Now, I mean, I do want to say, like, we still do only have 1% practicing Catholic under 35, and 94% of the population, of the Catholic population, no longer in practice. So it's not, I'm not saying that everything is, everybody's running into the church and because they don't have any hang-ups about the church, and so they're looking. No, they're looking, but they're open to spirituality, they're open to things, and unfortunately, well, I mean, they're going other places. They're not coming to us necessarily. Like, who would ever think that church could give me relevant answers about questions about life? Like, I go to the yoga or go to the psychologist or go to wherever, but I wouldn't think church would be a place. But I do agree with you that there is something happening. There's an openness that I didn't see 5 years ago, and especially among the really younger ones. That's an opportunity. And like, where are the workers in the vineyard? That is, Lord, send us workers in the vineyard. But
some of that opportunity is, I want to come back to the other thing that you said is, you said it's a more direct or a firm ground that they're looking at, or they're more open to that. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but sort of the old school militant atheism is also not in vogue anymore, and people are looking for people who have answers.
Another real interesting phenomenon, like the Dawkins and the Hitchinson is just not in anymore. But then you have people listening to some others who are not Catholics or not even Christians necessarily, like Jordan Peterson explaining the Bible and talking about transcendence. And but I mean, that's again an interesting phenomenon, right? Because here's someone. Just there's intellectuals on the high level seeing Christianity not just as something dangerous and horrible, even though they're maybe not even like part of our thing. Like, that's just, I agree with you. I mean, there's something, but going back to like the very kind of the start where we started off of, that was my point with the post-Christendom world. I think we need to be quite flexible in the adaptation, or in what, like, it's the old idea of marry your vision, date your model. You've got to be clear on your vision, but your model, like the strategy, what you're doing, has to be flexible. And perhaps if our institutions are too big, that just becomes difficult. Or if they become, now I'm not against institutions like, I mean, on top of that, I have to say, in our world, for example, we don't have Catholic schools. I know of one bigger, totally private Catholic school in the whole German-speaking world, and that's here in Vienna. Opus Dei runs it. They started it just 2 years ago. Besides that, all the so-called Catholic schools are partly funded by the government, which means that they also have part control. And like, appointing some of the teachers, which you can't fire because they're civil servants. It's just a big headache. And a lot of the Catholic schools are really in name, but not really. And another thing that people even from North America find it hard to understand the European situation, like also because of the church-state agreement that was introduced by Hitler. And, we don't have something like Sunday school or religion classes outside the schools. So we have religion classes in public schools. But it's not catechesis, it's so-called religion, or it's
akin to studying history, in school. It's the same emotional
or our
approach
theological
to it.
fact.
Yeah.
We really have Catholic universities. There's 3 exceptions in the whole German-speaking world that I know of. And you have Catholic theology at secular universities, which brings with it the problem that they're constantly having to prove themselves why they even have a right to be there. And so why they're constantly, we're free and we can, the science, and you have all these problems of these crazy German theologians. I mean, I'm not making it all bad. There's great theologians as well, but you have some pretty crazy stuff because they're constantly having to reinvent, have an excuse why they're even at the secular academy. And these institutions are just Like, how do you try to evangelize in that? Now I think in your case and in the United States, it's easier because you really do have private Catholic universities and big institutions. But I think the challenge still is the same, to have a movement attitude, how to create movement attitudes within these big institutions, which make them more flexible, in order to, in order to think how to evangelize. Because if not, like, just keeping things up in a Christendom way, I just think it's very difficult. Now, I realize you have some great institutions in North America which are doing wonderful works. Again, I don't want to, I shouldn't even venture on that train because I just don't know too little about it. I just see our own situation. I say, here it's rather small, flexible units, relatively small, flexible units, or and that become pockets of evangelism, but big enough so that they're not standalone ministries.
Yeah.
But that you can create really communities.
So I want to, this has been, very insightful and interesting. And I want to kind of leave people who are listening to the podcast with some encouragement. So when you think of what are ways you would like to encourage people that might be listening to this in North America, but maybe all around the world, from what you're seeing the Lord do in your particular context?
And Pope Benedict once said that the crisis of Europe is a crisis of hope. And I think that's so true, because it's really only through the faith that we're a really authentic Christian hope, and to realize there's never a hopeless situation for a Christian. And just that understanding, when I was here, I think I told you the last time, I was 10 years, 3 dysfunctional small groups after 10 years. It was running up against the wall, failure after failure after failure. Our dean who had one first communion in the whole year, and to see that, we're still small, like I told you, about all American, North American standards by any parish, but we started off with 10, now we have 400 people in our community, more or less. Average age is 25. We're seeing people come to faith. It's so beautiful, and to see, just different things that are happening. God can really turn things around. I mean, even on a personal note, thinking I'm a legionary of Christ. I think everybody who's somehow close to Catholic Church, usually when you think about scandals in the Catholic Church, you talk about the legionaries of Christ and their founder, and what a horrible thing that all was. And it's true. And it was a horrible thing and a horrible scandal. And yet, that was 2006, and now we're 2025. And I think we're just a lot healthier than we used to be. And there's a lot of people that were hurt, and all that was horrible. And I don't want in any way, but God is so great that he can do great, even out of great evil, bring about great good. And that doesn't make the evil good. It just makes God great. And I think I'm witnessing, I'm super excited. I love what I get to witness. I get to work with such great people that are so on fire for Jesus, and that, there's an idea from Andy Stanley. He says, try to be the dumbest person in the room, you as a leader. I love that idea. I have people that are so much better than me in so many different aspects around me, that is just so inspirational in so many different ways. And I don't just mean that from a leadership perspective. I also mean that from a discipleship perspective, just people who are very inspiring about. For example, I used to think that if I do 1 or 2 hours of adoration, 1 or 2 hours, 2 hours is super generous, and I die if I do something more than that. No. And then until we started 24/7 adoration, and then you have young people here, I'll take the time between midnight and 4 o'clock in the morning. And what did you just say? No, or they'll, I'll fast during Lent, on I don't know, Wednesdays and Fridays, and I won't eat anything. I'll just drink something. Or you just see, I'm just so inspired by some of our young evangelists that are 18 years old, and they're just, the other night, actually the night that I was talking to our common friend, which was just a few days ago, Mary Maher, there's a guy that wrote me a WhatsApp, and he says, hey, Father, anybody there to hear confessions yet tonight? And I said, well, I'm in this thing. I can't do it right now, but I could do it afterwards. So it was at 10:30. He had taken somebody along. He always he brings all his fitness studio friends to church. And like we're baptizing one of them now at Easter time. But so he just had in his, he was taking along his friend or his newfound friend, and he somehow got him to go to like be willing at 10:30 tonight to go and talk to a priest and hear that I hear his confession. And just like I don't know how he did that. I don't know, but it's just so beautiful to see how God works today. And I realized, like I noticed even in this country, there's so many places, so many parishes that don't have any young people. Like we have one of our co-workers that we just hired to run our cafe. We have a hotel in this new place, a small little boutique hotel with 13 rooms, and we just hired this guy. And the other day he was saying, I've never, because he wasn't such a close person to faith in the past, super open though, and he's really impressed. And 50 years of work, like he's kind of a retired hotel manager. I've never been able to work with a group of people like this before, that you are so excited about the faith, that actually there's somebody in church that's younger than me, and that's, and he's like, whatever, how old, and we have all these 20-year-olds of some things, and they're all, and it just like be able to tell people and show people. I think that's why so many parishes from all over the country are knocking on our doors looking for help, because it's a place to see and get inspiration and see, wow, this is really possible. Even in today's age, that young people find to Christ, that are on fire, they're missionary evangelists, and that just gives a lot of hope. Like going back to my primary point, which I think the crisis of Europe is a crisis of hope, and we have an opportunity to give hope to people, and that's just a beautiful thing, and just I feel so privileged and humbled to be part of that.
Father George, I'm so thankful for our conversation, and I just want to encourage you for being a gift to anyone who listens to this podcast, in the freedom that you have to risk for the sake of the kingdom, and to expand out of an immediate context and think about things differently. I think you guys are doing incredible work there, and I know that you're trying to raise money. So maybe the last thing is, if people want to support the mission that you have and get in touch with you, how can they do that? And where can they go to see more of your work and your vision and what you're trying to accomplish?
The best would probably be just our website, and we have an English version of that website. So if you go to zjp2.at and then click on English, then you'll see how to help. And we do have a cooperation with the Knights of Columbus in the United States, so that they have a donor fund so that people can get a tax rebate. We also have a cooperation with an organization in Canada, in order that people can give us money from Canada legally, and that it comes to us, and because that's like kind of not so easy to get money out of Canada for nonprofits elsewhere. So we do have these possibilities as well. If somebody's interested, maybe I can send you the direct link as well to our webpage, and you can maybe put it in the show notes or something.
We'll do that. Again, we'll put those in the show notes, and we'll have them available to people. And yeah, again, I just want to thank you. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for coming and sitting down again. And I look forward to keeping track with all the developments that you guys are doing and your innovation, and hearing what the Lord is doing in your midst. So appreciate you very much, and God bless.
Thank you. God bless you.